James City County School Board to order. Ms. Aller, can you please take the roll?
Dr. Cavazos.
Present.
Ms. Chen.
Here.
Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Mrs. Hunley. Here. Mrs. Donner.
Here. May I have a motion for the approval of the agenda? Thank you, Mrs. Hunley. Thank you, Mrs. Hunley. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Ms. Aller, please take the vote.
Mrs. Hunley.
Aye.
Dr. Cavazos.
Aye.
Ms. Chen.
Aye.
Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Mrs. Donner.
Aye. Wonderful. We will start with item 2.01, fiscal year 2027 budget
May I
discussion.
please just read my disclosure
Yes,
statement?
thank you for reminding me.
As a member of the School Board of Williamsburg, James City County, I acknowledge that I may have an interest in the FY27 school budget because my husband is an employee of the WJCC schools. However, I believe that I am able to participate in the consideration of the vote on the budget fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you, Mrs. Hunley. All right, I will hand it over.
Thank you, Ms. Donner. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Welcome to session 1 of 3 as we work diligently to put together the operating budget for fiscal year 27. We are excited about the opportunity to spend some time with you this afternoon to provide information and to answer some questions. The presentation today, we feel like, builds directly on the work that we started in December when we provided an initial FY27 overview and outlined some of the pieces of the fiscal landscape ahead, including projected local contributions, emerging expenditure pressures, as well as areas requiring further discussion and prioritization. Interestingly, over the last day and a half, Ms. Bowen, who's our Director of Finance, and our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Ewing, and I were in Richmond for the annual Superintendent School Business Officers Conference, where we spent a lot of time listening about some of the fiscal challenges and fiscal realities that are happening at the state level and how they may play out at each of the local levels. The work session is designed to continue the conversation around the work that we believe is most central, that is prioritizing our students. There are several nuances this evening that we want to share with you, and then I want to highlight that on the 13th of January, when we get together again for a work session, we're going to spend some time talking about potential compensation scenarios, as well as addressing ideas related to adding positions. And oftentimes in budget work sessions, we talk about the 3 letters, the F, the T, and the E, FTEs. And just for parlance, that is a position that we may add or choose to add to a budget when we talk about FTEs. So that will be the focus of our January 13th session. Our January 20th session will be focused on healthcare and some of the things that we are seeing related to healthcare, as well as trying to provide the board some summaries of what we think expenditures will look like and revenues will look like and where we move forward. After the 20th, the next opportunity for us to really talk about the budget will be that first meeting in February, where I will present an estimated budget or a superintendent's proposed budget, and then that same week we'll spend some time with our colleagues, the Board of Supervisors and City Council, and make a similar presentation. I do want to just bring forward these 3 questions this evening as we're having our conversations that I think will help ground us in the dialogue this evening. Question 1 is, how do our financial investments most directly support student learning and well-being? Our second question that I think we should consider as we're having this dialogue is, how do we remain competitive in attracting and retaining the people that our students depend upon every day? And then the third question is, how do we remain, that was the second question. The third question is, how do we steward public resources in a way that is transparent, strategic, and sustainable? I am excited to be joined by Ms. Bowen and Ms. Ewing this evening for the presentation. I'll also have a part of it as well, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and addressing questions as we go. Renee, are you kicking us off?
I am. Thank you,
Thank
Dr. Keever.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, members of the board.
This afternoon, we will be presenting and discussing preliminary information related to the fiscal year 27 operating budget. This information will include background information related to the requirements for developing the budget and a brief overview of the budget process to date, historical enrollment information, as well as the projection for next year, and will provide an overview of state revenue based on the governor's budget and some anticipated expenditure increases. Ms. Bowen, our Director of Finance, will begin with sharing the background information related to budget development.
Thank you. Our budget development is guided by state law, which sets clear expectations for both timing and content. These requirements establish the shared responsibilities between the superintendent and the school board and frame our annual budget calendar. Virginia State Code Section 15.2-2503 requires that on or before April 1st each year, we must approve a budget of need to pass on to our governing bodies, both Williamsburg and James City County. The second state code, section 22.1-92, estimate of monies needed for public schools, requires the superintendent, with the approval of the school board, to provide an estimate of the amount of money that is considered to be needed to support the public schools in the division, and that the budget must be set up by each major classification or category that has been prescribed by the Board of Education. At its core, our budget must advance the division's long-term strategy. Every major funding decision is evaluated against our Elevate 28 priorities, while also addressing operational realities and emerging needs across the division. This slide outlines the internal work that has already occurred and what is underway. In the October-November timeframe, we began collecting input from each school principal and each department administrator for the operating budget. At that time, they entered their requests into our financial system. We then met with departments individually to discuss their requests and determine their needs. We also had a joint meeting with our funding partners in October. In December, we began discussing and evaluating the cost center requests with the superintendent's senior leadership team. This process will continue throughout this month as we will share additional information over the next 2 budget work sessions.
Thank you, Kelsey. Next, we'll review the Local Composite Index and its role in determining state funding. The Local Composite Index, or LCI, is the state's measurement of each locality's ability to pay for public education. The formula takes into consideration the changes in property values and taxes, the total income and retail sales, and compares it to that for the entire state. Each locality's index is adjusted to maintain an overall statewide local share of 45% and an overall state share of 55%. Much of our funding is derived from a per pupil cost multiplied by 1 minus the composite index. So the lower the composite index results in more state funding, while a higher composite index would result in less state funding. The LCI is supposed to be an indicator of the wealth of the locality. If it goes up, the locality is deemed to have increased wealth and will be able to provide additional funding to support its programs. The maximum LCI is 0.8. The LCI is updated at the start of each biennium, and since our school division serves 2 localities, we have 2 LCIs, both of which have decreased for the new biennium. The city of Williamsburg has changed from 0.7426 to 0.7264, and James City County's is decreasing from 0.5403 to 0.5319 for the 26-28 biennium. This chart is a historical view of the Local Composite Index starting in fiscal year 2010 through fiscal year 28. Williamsburg was consistently at the highest LCI of 0.8 until fiscal 18 when it started decreasing, and James City County's LCI has been more volatile throughout the years. This chart shows a comparison of our LCI with divisions here on the peninsula, as well as 3 of the larger Region 2 divisions on the south side. As you can see, Williamsburg and James City County have the highest LCI of any locality in our area. Unfortunately, that means fewer state dollars for our schools and an increased dependence on our local funding partners. We have been very fortunate to have strong support for education from our funding partners over the years. Enrollment trends are a key driver of both revenue and expenditures. Even modest changes can have downstream impacts on staffing, class sizes, transportation, and state funding formulas. Enrollment is based on our September 30th student count each year, and this is a historical look at our enrollment from fiscal year 2018 until now. We saw a decline in enrollment in fiscal year 21 to 10,858 due to the pandemic, and saw increases each year until the current year, where enrollment has dropped by 233 students. Each year, FutureThink prepares a 10-year enrollment projection based on our September 30th enrollment information. These projections include a low, moderate, most likely, and high projection. Next year's projection ranges from a low of 11,048 students to a high of 11,521 students. Since COVID, we have been developing our budget based on the current year enrollment and plan to continue doing so for the fiscal year 27 budget cycle. As a reminder, these enrollment numbers do not include our preschool students, which total 395 each year. Taking a turn and looking at revenue, this slide reflects the parameters of the joint agreement reached in October, with local contributions increasing by $6 million for fiscal year 27. While this establishes a baseline, the board does have the option to request additional funding should priorities or needs warrant it. At this stage, state revenue projections are based on the governor's proposed budget. These figures may change as the General Assembly completes its work, which introduces some uncertainty into our planning. This table shows a comparison of our state revenue based on Governor Youngkin's budget and compared to our fiscal year 26 budget. The introduced budget includes the state's share of routine re-benchmarking of costs for all standards of quality and other direct aid programs. These technical adjustments include updates for factors such as funded salaries, annual school report data used to calculate prevailing costs, inflation factors, standards of learning test score updates, enrollment updates, free lunch and identified student percentage data updates, and projected caseloads for lottery, incentive, and categorical programs. These adjustments reflect the cost of continuing current programs with the required biennial data updates used in the funding formulas and do not reflect any changes in policy. The introduced budget reflects the most recent estimates of sales tax revenue dedicated to public education as computed by the Department of Taxation. These updates are technical in nature and reflect the latest economic forecast with no changes in policy regarding the sales tax base itself. The revised sales tax estimates include both the 1% portion and the 1/8% portion that are appropriated for distribution to school divisions based on school age population. It is projected that we will see an increase of $879,000 in fiscal 27 related to sales tax. The rebenchmarked budget represents the state cost of continuing direct aid programs into the next biennium, with updates to the input data like average salary used in the funding formulas that determine the cost of the programs. Since 90% of state direct aid funding is for SOQ programs, SOQ funding is most impacted by the rebenchmarking process. As you can see from this table, our estimated increase in SOQ funding is approximately $5.3 million. As an example of a funded salary for SOQ positions, elementary teachers' funded salary in the 24-26 biennium was $61,514, and for the 26-28 biennium, it is $64,762. Incentive programs will see a decrease of approximately $1.7 million. This decrease is related to the compensation supplement. The current year budget included funds for a 3% compensation supplement, and the fiscal 27 introduced budget proposes state funding for a 2% salary increase with an effective date of July 1st, 2026, and another 2% salary increase effective July 1st, 2027. The state funding is calculated for funded SOQ instructional and support positions. Funded SOQ instructional positions include teacher, school counselor, librarian, instructional aide, principal, and assistant principal positions funded through the SOQ staffing standards for each school division. School divisions must certify to the Department of Education that they will provide an average 2% increase to be eligible for full state funding in fiscal '27. The total projected lottery amounts in fiscal '27 and '28 are being used to fund the state share of the cost of various programs, such as the Infrastructure and Operations Per Pupil Fund, Early Reading Intervention, K-3 Primary Class Size Reduction, Special Education Regional Tuition, SOL Algebra Readiness, and part of the at-risk add-on. We are estimating an increase in state lottery funding of approximately $125,000. Overall, we are looking at a total increase in state funding of approximately $4.6 million, or 6% over our current fiscal year '26 budget.
Before we shift to the next slide, hold on one second, Renee. I did want to underscore the idea that the funded SOQ instructional positions include the positions that she mentioned, but I think it's important for us to remember and for our community to be aware that while the SOQ positions include teacher, counselor, librarian, aide, principal, assistant principal, that does not include all of the ones that we employ within our division to support the needs of our students. There is a formula that is utilized, and at various junctures, as we've had conversations with members of the state legislature, we have tried to make the case that there is a need to continue to look at the SOQ funding related to the positions. Are there specific questions about the revenue pieces that are provided in Governor Youngkin's budget, recognizing that Governor Spanberger and the General Assembly, or Governor-elect Spanberger, and the General Assembly will have a lot to talk about in the session coming up?
Any questions? Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about compensation then. It's something that is particularly important to our staff and our community. It remains one of the largest and most sensitive components of the budgeting process. The governor's budget provides a 2% salary increase for funded SOQ instructional and support positions effective July 1. This state amount comes in at about $915,000. The cost for us to add a percentage point, a 1% increase for staff, is about $1.3 million. So you can see there that a 2% raise based on what the state puts in and what it costs us to provide that across the board comes out at about $1.6 million that we need to handle here locally. It is important for us to continue to work on our salary pieces and compensation pieces, which is why a year ago, or a year and a half ago now, we went through, I think, a rigorous compensation study. We retained Bolton Rewards. You might recall from meetings about a year ago that Bolton presented the findings to the board. The ideas that came forward were multifaceted, and initially we looked to make compensation and pay adjustments in a phased approach. And last year, as we were talking about fiscal '26, we did a phased approach for year one of the compensation study because we recognized that the total dollar amount, as recommended by Bolton, was not something within our realm in terms of the operating budget. Select teachers in various lanes, and when I say lanes, I'm talking about bachelor and master's and doctorate, and then where you are on the scale, received above a 3% increase, but 3% was our starting point last year on the instructional scale. We also implemented a unified scale where we had previously a support scale and an administrative scale. We compressed that into one. Let me dive a little bit more deeply into the instructional scale. So there's been talk about what we were able to do for teachers last year, and so I think this slide is particularly important, that the minimum adjustment on the positive side was a 3% increase. The average increase for teachers on the bachelor's, master's, and master's plus 30 and doctorate was nearly 5%. And some members of the bachelor's lane received upwards of 9%, and as you could see across that chart, the step 0 aligns with the compensation study recommendation, and we also began the process last year of developing more rigorous progression between our steps. And one of the pieces that you might recall from previous conversations was varying amounts between our steps as teachers progressed in their years of service. Last year, we made a very concerted effort to get to a half percentage point, which is also a way for us to continue to build out progression and eliminate compression. And finally, there was an emphasis for additional increases beyond 3% within specific years of service. Renee, if we could go to the next slide, please. What was the outcome of that? Well, it allowed us to make up a little bit of headway in terms of the bachelor scale, where we still are third comparatively to our neighbors. It allowed us to make up a little bit of ground on the master side of the house, where we, at the step 0, went to third, but still maintain a competitive imbalance with our competitors. And it's important that we continue to keep this in front of ourselves as we talk about the pay for our instructional staff and compensating them for the work that they do. Let me also mention that there was very targeted work done related to our unified scale. And we recognize that our support staff is absolutely critical to our ability to provide strong services and strong education for our young people. We raised the minimum pay rate for all employees to $15.50 an hour. We brought employees up to the minimum of Bolton's recommended pay scale. And there was additional implementation of the compensation study last year, specifically targeting those staff members that are in current grades 5 through 16. Previously, they were on the support scale 1 through 7 or something in that neighborhood. We very specifically worked to address compensation features for what we consider to be incredibly important staff members who are also the lowest paid. So what happens next? As we shared with you in December, I think that we want to continue to keep focused on the compensation study, and there are some specific year 2 action steps. We need to continue to improve the step progression on the teacher scale. We need to update job title structure on the unified scale to provide more clarity at each of the grades, and we need to make and continue to look at targeted adjustments on the unified scale for staff members. And finally, as we've heard over the course of the last year, there is a need for us to address gaps in our stipend program and supplemental pay program.
Along with compensation investments, as grant funding expires.
I'm sorry, Renee. Let's pause there on the compensation piece and see if the board had any comments, feedback, questions in that realm. Compensation's a big deal.
Yeah. We'll give members a moment to think and see if something has stood out to you. While members are thinking, I did have one question on slide, I don't know what slide number it says, 15, where you show the teacher scale. At what steps were those additional increases beyond the 3% focus on?
Generally in the year 10 through 22, 23 range.
Okay.
Where we found ourselves further behind our competitors. And in all sincerity, that was, in our opinion, that was kind of a year 2 of a targeted adjustment. We utilized the compensation study results to further verify what we feel like we already knew, and that's that our staff members generally on the instructional scale 7 through 25, 26 were behind our peers. And so the year prior, fiscal year 25, there was some amount of money that was dedicated specifically to address those areas as well.
Thank you. I did have another question.
Sure.
Oh, waiting for me. And this actually goes back to the first section. I know that we are basing our budget on K-12. do we get money from the state for pre-K, or how is that funded from a state revenue perspective?
Great question. Go ahead,
Do
Renee.
you get some VPI funding that we have over in our grants fund? Offhand, I want to say it's between 300,000 and 500,000.
The rest of the financial implications for running a full-scale pre-K program would then divert back to the locality.
So that is something that the locality is truly supporting us doing pre-K. Is the pre-K kind of tuition of roughly what we would spend on a student, like 15 to 17 per pupil, or what's the?
We'd probably want to run that calculation and
Yeah.
get back to you on that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm just doing a rough. I mean, it's almost roughly like $45 million or so to run a pre-K program. If you assumed it was 15,000 per pupil, I don't know if it's less. But even if it's less, and you have three, actually, I hit an extra zero. Sorry, 1.8 million.
There's some economies of scale that we are able to take advantage of in terms of pieces related to transportation and operational pieces, but we'll crunch a number for you in terms of specifically pre-K.
Thanks. Yes, Mr. Ruffle.
Inside of that question, could we have like the initial costs for pre-K too, just to like kind of, I don't think many divisions put that out as like a starter. We're building 2 facilities along with putting on the support staff. It'd be nice to know like what locality and like in the state's not doing, and then see like where we can identify like how we could be compensated further in the future.
We'll get that together for you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Chen, did I see you?
Yes.
Sorry, Mr.
No, you're fine. I feel like historically we've always committed to at least a minimum of 3%. So I just noticed on slide 12, and I know it's a summary of what's, what is in the state budget, but I'm wondering if that is something that we're building into the numbers that across the board, no matter what, it's going to be 3%, or at least aiming for that as an initial goal. I know we're early in the
We are early, and we felt like it was most appropriate for us to say what had been acknowledged publicly in the governor's budget in terms of a 2% piece. Our goal would be to come back to you on the 13th with some different scenarios related to compensation increases for staff. We did share in December that there are specific dollar amounts that we had anticipated for year 2 of the comp study, both on the instructional side and the support side, which is now the unified side. I don't want anybody to hear our conversation around compensation and not understand that we are talking about, in essence, looking specifically at all staff, instructional scale and unified scale to enhance the compensation pieces. But we'll come back to you on the 13th with some different possibilities. I think we're also challenged as an organization just in terms of how things begin to transpire in Richmond. We heard quite a bit over the course of the last day and a half around potential revenues and potential challenges at the state level in terms of Medicaid funding, and that Medicaid funding might potentially have an impact on education funding and what is able to be done at the state level, and then how does that then impact the local level. The state is projecting less enrollment, so there's less money flowing into public ed at the state level. For us, it actually works out okay in terms of the re-benchmarking, even though we're down some students as well. So it will be interesting, I think, to see how things begin to transpire over the course of the next several weeks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Hodges.
I was just curious, with the minimum wage being $15.50, I was curious, how many employees do we have that receive that minimum wage, and then what types of positions are those? Are those mostly like part-time, or are those full-time, and what sort of positions are those?
I saw Mr. Baker pull out his compensation book. I don't have mine in front of me. Tim, we probably can't give you the numbers. We can give you the job classes. Pull the mic towards you, Tim.
On the unified scale, grade 1 is bus aides, cafeteria workers, and custodians. And then the next level, U2, is teacher assistants, ones for preschool, special ed, and general ed. So those are the lowest on the scale.
We can also work on and provide back just the number of employees and the different job classifications so you can get a sense of that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Okay. All right.
Renee?
Along with compensation investments, as grant funding expires or declines, we face decisions about whether and how to sustain positions that have become integral to our operations. These transitions represent real cost increases that must be absorbed into the operating budget. We have several positions currently funded through various grants that we anticipate moving into the operating budget. There are positions that are partially funded by Title I, which saw a decline in funding this year, and Title II, which had a delay in funding being released this year. All-in funds have been supporting one full-time position, and that funding expires at the end of this fiscal year. Lastly, Title VI-B has remained essentially level funded for many years, yet our salary and benefit costs increase each year, so the grant cannot continue sustaining the same number of positions. We did start transitioning positions out of this grant during the current fiscal 26 budget cycle and anticipate transitioning 4 additional positions during the 27 budget cycle. This slide highlights programs currently supported by one-time all-in state funding that will expire at the end of the current fiscal year. These funds were used to address literacy, learning recovery, and chronic absenteeism, and supported tutoring at the middle school level and in 2 non-Title I elementary schools, as well as summer professional development through Camp GPS. This represents a decision about sustaining programs that were implemented utilizing temporary funding but have ongoing instructional impact. These next 2 slides highlight required cost increases over which the division has limited discretion. Many of these reflect contractual obligations, insurance trends, or instructional services that must continue year to year. For New Horizons, we're estimating a 20% increase as we anticipate the need for additional special education placements. Final costs will be updated once information is received from the program. The Canvas Learning Management System continues to be used in all K-12 classrooms. While it has been state funded for the past 6 years, future state support is uncertain, so the budget includes funding to ensure continuity of instruction. Special education contractual costs reflect increased demand for services such as nursing support to meet student needs. This slide also includes funding to expand athletic trainer coverage to all 4 middle schools. This investment enhances the health and safety of student athletes by ensuring timely injury prevention, evaluation, and response during practices and competitions. Finally, insurance and shared service costs reflected projected increases based on current market trends and information provided by James City County. This slide reflects required cost increases tied primarily to operations and systems that support safe, reliable school operations. With the pre-K centers scheduled to be substantially complete in January 27, the budget includes a partial year of utility costs to ensure those buildings are fully operational. Operational contractual increases also reflect updated service agreements, including maintenance, storage, and shared services with James City County. A significant portion of this increase is related to the county beginning to fully invoice the division for stormwater and grounds maintenance, improving accuracy and transparency in cost accounting. And additional increases support essential safety, security, and transportation systems that the division relies on daily.
Let's pause just for a second there and see if there are any questions over the course of the last 3 slides related to some of those items that we have determined that are going to be mandatory cost increases that we need to consider in the budgeting process.
Mr. Riffle?
Yeah, we talked about the New Horizons increase. 20% is pretty large for no change in how much we get on New Horizons. Also, like transportation's not even included in that increase, I'm assuming. So
Right. I think that that one of the pieces that we anticipate the potential for needing is some additional placements in the special education program offerings at New Horizons. The cost per seat in those programs is more expensive than the cost per seat in some of the career and technical education pieces. The other scenarios that New Horizons now is going through their budgeting process as well. Last year we went with a lower number and had to come back around later and increase that number. So this year we're starting higher, and hopefully we can come back with a lower number as that budget process works through.
And could you remind me, our adjustment for New Horizons is based off our tuition, like how many students we send there, or is it a certain number of slots? I just can't remember, like how Newport News and Hampton, everyone else kind of partners with it, but.
Right, it's based on the numbers of students that are participating in the programs and what those programs cost. So there are seat pieces that we maintain, and then in cases like special education, we can request additional seats for placement, but with that comes the additional cost.
Gotcha. Thank you, Dr. Huber.
I have a question about Title I and Title II and just our federal funding in general. And I don't think we talked about it in this, and this could be for another conversation. But I am curious as to what has been the change in our federal funding and what that impact has had on our schools. So, and I ask this because I was at a school visit and it was a Title I school, and so that principal was sharing how the decrease in Title I funding has impacted ability for our students in terms of reading and different ways that she was able to support those students. And so I'm just curious, I'd love to understand what that impact has been, both financially and then if there's any perspective from a learning perspective for our students.
We'll try to get some information together on that. I believe at this point we have not seen a specific reduction in Title I funds. Am I correct on that front? It's still reimbursable, and we continue to be reimbursed.
If I recall, the last Title I amendment, I believe it was a reduction a little over $200,000.
Okay.
In comparison to the previous grant-funded year.
Oh, sorry, yes, Ms. Huntley.
For the middle school athletic trainers, that's going to be a new line item. Do we anticipate having a hard time recruiting them, or will we go to some type of contract service for those 4 people that will cover the 4 schools?
At the middle school level now, it's contracted.
It's contracted.
And we have been utilizing in the contract 2 trainers that cover the 4 schools.
Got you. Okay.
We have, I think, and just based on some scenarios that have been brought to my attention, we have some significant liability pieces when there's not a trainer on site for athletic competitions or practices, and need to increase our contractual obligation to ensure that there's somebody there.
And as far as I can't remember when my kids were in sports, if a child is injured, the school division covers, or the parents' insurance, which?
There are a couple of different models that are available.
Okay.
in terms of through the Virginia High School League. There's catastrophic insurance that is typically available. Parents do often have some responsibilities as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Hodges.
On the all-in funding piece, you list those 2 line items that are expiring. Is the presumption that we would continue picking up the funding of those programs, or would those simply just cease at this point?
We would be recommending by adding them into the operating budget to continue those items. I think on the Camp GPS scenario, have provided teachers compensation to do training in the summer months outside of their contract to get ready for the school year. We think that's a particularly strong component, and we also feel like the tutoring pieces are also important. So our scenario would be to bring that into the operating budget since the grant funding is sunsetting.
Is there any thought about expanding those programs if they've been successful, or maintaining them at their current level?
I think that one of our challenges, Mr. Hodges, as we continue through this, is that there will be other items that we're bringing to you that we think we should start or that we need to continue or to expand. One of the scenarios that this board has talked quite a bit about is JROTC. And JROTC comes with a price tag. And so how do we line that up with some of the other pieces that are priorities as well? Initially, I think that's the right dollar amount to allocate to those two items for all in.
All right, thank you.
I do have one other question around Canvas. And so is that a state regulation that we have to use that particular system?
It's not. It became, I believe Williamsburg James City County has used Canvas for some time, and then the state during, I believe, COVID or shortly thereafter, picked it up as an expenditure at the state level and provided it to school divisions. At some juncture, the funding for that began to expire. Last year, it was picked back up in the fiscal year. We hope that it might get picked up again at the state level. If we were to change learning management systems and platforms, you're talking about a fairly significant sea change for staff and students in terms of learning a new system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's why we put VDOE question mark. Or put VDOE exclamation point, but at this point we'll put a question mark.
Got it. Any other questions? All right.
Thanks, Renee.
This slide reflects a number of intentional investments that support teaching and learning, employee growth, and family connection, all aligned with Elevate 28. The proposed increases enhance student experiences, strengthen instructional practice, and continue building internal talent pipelines. They also support leadership development and ensure clear, timely communication with families, particularly as we navigate redistricting. Taken together, these investments are designed to improve outcomes, support workforce stability, and maintain trust with our community. This timeline outlines the board's upcoming opportunities for deeper discussion, public input, and collaboration with our local government partners. Your guidance during the January work sessions will directly inform the superintendent's proposed budget. In closing, tonight's presentation is about framing the challenges and choices ahead. We look forward to continued dialogue with the board as we refine priorities and work toward a budget that supports our students, staff, and community.
Happy to answer questions, happy to talk about some of those other expenditure increases. One of the pieces that we talked about in terms of our previous budget workshop in December was that our departments had made some requests. These are some initial items that would be additional expenditures that we believe are particularly important. We can be in a position to talk more about those with you as we move forward. Maybe you have other things that you want to see from us as we get ready for the 13th and the 20th.
I have a question. Dr. Keever,
Yes, sir.
excuse me. Career and technical teachers for tomorrow's interns, that's 67.5 is for the teachers themselves, and how many are there? More or less?
Let me defer to Renee. I believe this is for student experiences.
Student experiences.
It's for student experiences to participate in the Teach for Tomorrow program.
Oh, I see.
I know we mentioned it in the past. I know you said it verbatim yourself. We're talking about support staff as much as we talk about our, actual educators. I would like to see a specific block kind of pushing kind of that narrative in the future. It's just important. It's kind of too important not to highlight. It's mostly a concern from both educators and the support staff themselves. But really, it's a priority of the board, I think, or of myself as a board member. I think these employees do a lot of work, and they deserve as much compensation as their other colleagues, because they are the hands and feet that move the division. And Mr. Simon does a good job at presenting those folks to us, but also they're I think of our SROs and things like that fit into these blocks that are a little different than most educator positions. So that's the only really recommendation I have. I'm interested to see how this plays out as well. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's optimism, I think.
So let me ask a follow-up question of you then, Mr. Riffle. As you think about the unified scale and staff members that are on the unified scale, are there particular grades that you want us to look at, or when we talked about the compensation study, I feel like there's another 600,000, close to 700,000 that we were talking about putting back into the unified scale to address compensation from the December presentation. That would be year two, similar to the year two on the instructional side.
Right.
But are there particular grades that you're most concerned about?
I would say like not really grades, but more like employment type. Like when it comes to special education or a bus driver or cafeteria workers, these are concerns that have been brought. Like I spent Miss Huntley and I talked to Toano Middle Schools, not Toano, JBB's Chef Seth, and he talked about like him moving to was a great decision for him, right? And it was important for him and his family to do that stuff, but it is a pay cut when it comes to being a chef in Williamsburg, right? Like being that type of work. He's full time. He's able to whip up this little dish for us and stuff, but that takes a lot of work to kind of run a kitchen, but also right. And you got to think about these people like not leaving. I don't want them to like find another best thing to do. Precarious as a new project, he jumps in, right? Like that's just the stuff we're dealing with. It's tough to be in that respect. Nothing I can say to him right then and there, right? But I mostly just want to see like how we're highlighting it in the future. Mm-hmm. Not really much like changing what our approach is. I think our approach using the Bolton study is like kind of, I would say, foolproof to an extent. It is kind of done better than what I think this board can kind of come up with as a plan. I just want to make sure that when we talk about those positions moving into, that we specifically highlight like this is what it looks like to be like a grade 1 like cafeteria worker or a grade 5, right? And it's just more describing it to us, because I can be like, oh, this is what it looks like to be with our division this long, or like this type of stuff, right? So he just joined, right? And that's a difference in like someone who's been here for 30 years, like Ms. Vega, right? Like those are people who've climbed the scale and they've seen like 5 or 6 different types of scales, right? So
it sounds like what you're saying is that it's the progression within the scale, right, versus perhaps the starting point in some cases. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, you can all kind of say that 1550 is kind of like a great place to start. I think that's, it's not living wage, it's not anything like that, but it is an occupational wage. It's just dependent on like what their job type is, and I can't specifically talk to a janitor and talk to a cafeteria worker the same way, right? Like
right.
It's just hard for me as a board member to kind of wrap my head around it, but also have a conversation same day in the same room to an extent.
Sure.
Right. So it's just kind of equipping ourselves better as
right.
The people who kind of oversee this part. And I don't want to say something. I just got to say like, let me get back to you.
Well, it's also interesting, I think, as you begin to look at some of the job classifications and the variances in terms of number of contractual days, the hours within that contract, and then how is that annuitized over the course of a year, and what the number of days that I work versus the number of days that you work versus the number of days that person works, and then where does that fall in the scale as well?
Yeah.
Those become very nuanced conversations in some cases.
Yeah, and this is my last. I most want to respond back. I think that's kind of the point of what I want to be a part of the board for. I really want to understand like what it is that you kind of mull over as a senior leadership team,
right?
And not just approving a budget because it's been recommended to us, right? I understand the purpose of both of those things. It's just more like when we visit schools, it feels as if I have very little to say about something that's the most important part of like maybe their aspect of being a part of our division, right? And it's like, how does it look for the future? Like, I don't know how Bolton really breaks it down into year 3 of the study, but I often say there's hope to this person, right? Like,
right.
Thanks for being a part of our team, and we're excited for what's going to come. I'm not going to step away from the message, I promise you. It's just more like, how do we equip ourselves to have conversations that are tough with our employees that really want results for themselves and their colleagues. So.
Sure.
So thank you.
Sure.
Just to piggyback on what Mr. Riffle was saying, I know all of us, as we went around to schools and visited schools, when we asked administration what did they need, it was almost verbatim. They needed more instructional staff support, especially special ed. When I went to the Parapaloozle event, which was awesome, to hear some of them talk about it, especially some of them were one-on-one aides and things. And a lot of them mentioned, you know, we were excited what you did for bus drivers, that when we increased, and they said, you know, something like that, you know, what about us? That was the question. They usually say, what about us? Like, we are important too. So definitely that's something we have to look at. And they stay because they love it here. I mean, but some of them talk about how much their insurance eats up their check. And
Sure.
and all I could say was thank you for staying, and we're working on it.
I think that's another good opportunity for us as an organization, and then as we're talking with members of our state legislative team around the SOQ pieces and funding additional instructional assistance at the state level allows for us to do a better job by way of our employees in terms of their hourly wage, because we are stretched at the local level when it comes to positions. We want to provide a strong level of base pay for all of our instructional aides, and that becomes a challenge.
And then I had one more question. It was way back on another slide when we were talking about how we have made some gap in the teachers that we looked at in certain groups. Do we have anything that shows that? I know there was one area that's where teachers were jumping from one division to another. Do we have anything that shows that, hey, yeah, we had less movement at this scale, and we do believe it was because of compensation?
We can provide data to you on our departures from the last school year and where those departures were in terms of their years of service or scale placement.
Mm-hmm.
When people leave us, we do our level best to ask,
Right.
help us know why.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to report what those reasons are in the aggregate. It is self-reporting, and so I might say I'm leaving because of healthcare. I might say I'm leaving because of salary. Frankly, I'm leaving because it's more convenient, and I'm less likely to say that it's more convenient and more likely to say it's salary. So it's hard to draw a firm line on that, but we can tell you where our departures are in terms of numbers of years of service. I will say that we staffed fewer openings last year. So in some cases, and we basically staffed at the same level in terms of need. We didn't cut teachers, so we retained folks, and I think that's a positive message. But let's get some data together from Human Resources in terms of the exiting staff and where they were scale wise. That'll help, I think, substantiate some of the things that we think are occurring.
Yes, Mr. Hodges.
First off, I want to basically second everything that Mr. Riffle and Ms. Hunley had to say about the support staffers, making sure that we're doing right by our support team, I think is incredibly important. But on the teacher scale side, I did want to highlight some things that I've heard from some of our veteran teachers, which is this thought of, once you've been in the system for 15, 20, 30 years, you pretty much capped out on the scale. And there's this sense from some of them of, well, okay, what am I sticking around for? And the obvious answer is the love of children, the love of what they do. But I do think as we look at the retention piece, that we should try to keep in mind some of those teachers who have been here, who are essentially lifers, and have given a lot of time to the division, that we make sure that we still are incentivizing them to hang around and to keep doing this, and that we reward them for their extended service.
If I heard you correctly, that might be different than a general salary increase, because as we have applied a percentage raise for all staff on the instructional side have received that, whether that be salary out of the gate or salary and an additional stipend to make up the 3%. Like, for instance, last year, are you suggesting something different than that, just so I can be sure as we talk about that and come up with different scenarios?
I'm thinking as folks climb up and get closer and closer to that step 30, that there is maybe like additional percentages added in there so that there is an incentive to stay within the school division and reach step 30, which ultimately would lead to more money for them, and maybe bonus structures as well. I'm not entirely sure what that would look like, just throwing it out there and relaying what I've heard from folks who have been around for a while, that there is this sense of, it'd be nice to still be, receiving a reward for service outside of, what is kind of standard that goes to everybody.
Okay. Tim, did you, just in terms of our scale progression,
Excuse me, our scale actually goes to 40, which is
Okay.
a little unusual compared to a lot of our neighbors and other districts. So usually at the top of the scale, we do a little better.
the other piece that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Hodges, and we're going to continue to look at this year, is that there was some compression in our scale that I think we needed to address based on the feedback that we received from Bolton and just based on our own awareness of there's not a lot of difference between year 19, 20, and 21. And so we are trying to create that half percentage point throughout our scale. And then what I think that you'll see that we're going to come back with in the next week or so is what does that look like to make that even a little bit bigger? Because ultimately that scale progression and having a very specific amount between each level rewards the idea of longevity and then helps us streamline scales as we move forward.
I look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Dan?
No,
Bill?
I'm going to say something. I think that this, the group of people who put this budget together, I mean, they know darn well what they're doing. I mean, they've been doing this year after year after year. And I really think they've looked at everything that's been talked about before. I mean, the employees, the teachers, the teachers' aides, the tenured people, the not so tenured people. I don't have any questions because it's so well formatted and it's a lot of thought's been put into it. And, you can nuance this thing to death. But fundamentally, there's only so much money available from our partners, right? And only so much from the state. And there's virtually no federal. So there's not much you can do with that. And I think you guys have massaged this very, very well. And there's really not a lot of room for a lot of discussion. I mean, you want to try and add, but you really can't add because there's not a lot of money to add. So you do what you have and you massage it and you make it better. And I think people stay here not only for money, because they like it here. I mean, it's a nice culture. It's very well, managed. I mean, you guys are involved. I mean, you guys are really concerned. And I think that's it's palpable. And so I think that, you guys do a very good job of making this division really, really a place to be. And I can sense it all the time. So I feel very comfortable saying, WJCC, it's definitely a place you want to be. And so I think money's important, but it's not the end all, the be all. There are a lot of people, and there's other reasons why people leave this teaching profession. It's not all money. And to your point, I mean, it's hard to say, really why they're leaving. Some people are maybe very straightforward, and maybe some of them are not. But I don't think it's always money. And I know there's a lot of emphasis on that, and that's important because, cost of living has gone up. So if you cover the cost of living like we do in our business, that's good. I mean, to get beyond that is really, in my mind, generous.
We do believe that culture is really important. And we've talked about the need and the focus on the culture of the workplace in each of our buildings and our offices and our departments. Compensation is a key feature, but then feeling like you're supported at work and understanding that we're here to provide you with a place to do great things for students is also a key feature of what we want to talk about.
Well, you had that last meeting, I believe, is where you put out all those results about how, did you feel like you were supported? Did you feel like, you belonged? And those were good numbers. I mean, those were very, very, very good numbers.
And one last thing, the behavior specialists in the elementary schools was also another hot topic
Sure.
for most every administrator. So I know we took them out last year, and that's something we really need to focus on as well.
We'll spend some time talking about that on the 13th. I think I've advised the board that based on what we believe are some attrition savings that we're having this year, that we've added a couple of positions mid-year into some of our schools to try to help A, provide the necessary supports, and B, get a sense of how does it work and what is it going to look like. So as we go through that staffing process, we're excited to hopefully continue that on in fiscal year 27 and fund those positions, if not some more. But we'll bring forward some of those additional positions that we think are necessary and are being requested on a pretty recurring basis when we talk to you next week.
Yes, Ms. Chen.
Can I just add one quick thing? I think another thing that would be helpful at our next budget discussion related to the last bullet point on slide 17, the address gaps in stipends and supplemental pay. I think that's something that's come up over and over again. And just for all of our awareness as board members when we're communicating, it'd be good for us to have an idea of historically sort of what is in place right now in
Okay.
terms of stipends and supplemental pay, just so we know, and then what recommendations on a more detailed level, and sort of what are the requests that have been coming in that haven't been able to be met for various reasons, which, you know, there are a lot of demands, of course, on the budget, but it'd be good just to have a more in-depth understanding of sort of past, current, and where we see the gaps and what needs to be addressed as a priority.
And now that she's brought that up too, it was helpful one time in the past when I think Mr. Baker may have brought what other divisions pay their people in those stipends, and we were kind of above. So it's also good if we could have that to say, yes, I know you feel like there's an increase here, but this is, you know, what other division, like where we line up with
Sure.
other divisions as far as some of those stipends.
What we will probably consider doing as part of the presentation on the 13th is looking at some of the more recent work that we had Bolton do around our stipends. We knew that stipends was an area that needed some attention, so Bolton did some benchmarking of our stipends for us. You might recall on the 16th of December when we presented sort of a budget overview or outlook that we put a placeholder amount in terms of a dollar figure that we felt like would help us begin to address some of the stipend concerns. We likely will be in a position on the 13th to talk more specifically about where those dollars could be allocated, but I think it'll be helpful for you to see where WJCC stacks up related to stipends in terms of like school divisions or school divisions in our area. I as a stipend holder throughout the first 10 or 12 years of my career, believe very strongly that those small hourly amounts that you receive go a long way, and these folks that are in stipend positions are in it because they really, really love working with our young people. And I think that that's an important component to value. We're not valuing necessarily at the same level we would love to value, but it's a nice nice way for us to recognize that work.
Any other board member comments or questions?
Thank you. We appreciate the engagement and dialogue and look forward to spending more time with you next week around compensation pieces, stipend pieces, and potential positions that we feel like could be and should be added.
Okay. Well, that was our one item, so our budget work session is now adjourned.